Okay, so today's daf is Samech Chet. We're going to start on Samech Zayin Amud Bet, 10 lines from the bottom. So it said yesterday, Amar Mar Zav V'chol Zav L'Rabot Balkeri, that we talked about the pasuk that delineates 3 different kinds of tumah. Each one is sent out of the camp further than the next. Or actually, it's listed in the opposite order. It's listed in the order of severity. So it starts with the Kol Tzarua, which is the furthest, then Zav, which is only is in the second camp, and then you have the Tamei Nefesh, who's only excluded from one camp. And so we said yesterday that Zav v'chol Zav l'rabot balkeri, that the word Kol Zav means that whatever rule applies to the Zav is the person who has this emission from his genitalia, which is a persistent one and a problematic one, an unhealthy one, is the same as Balkeri. A Balkeri is a person who has a normal seminal emission, not anything unusual. So they're treated in the same way in terms of their exclusion from the camp. So, meaning to say, and the Gemara points this out. This supports Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said 2 things. Why are they mentioned together? So Rashi says because the students would repeat the teachings of the teacher that were taught together, even if they don't have any particular connection to one another. So the first principle was machilot lo nitkadeshu, which means the tunnels underneath the temple, underneath the Beit HaMikdash, the tunnels under the mountain, don't have any kedusha. So the caves or the tunnels even they might be directly underneath the Holy of Holies, they're not holy themselves. That's why you can go on that tunnel tour in Israel, right? So he says, and he also said that we send the Balkeri out of 2 camps, meaning in modern terms that would mean out of the Beit HaMikdash and off of Har HaBayit. So he can't be on the Beit HaMikdash and he can't be on the Temple Mount at all. But he could be in Jerusalem. Okay? Because we're talking about the 3 levels. In the Midbar, that meant he couldn't be in the Mishkan, and he couldn't be in the Levitical camp, but he could be in the Machane Yisrael. Could be in the regular Israelite camp. So the Gemara says, Metive will raise an objection to this Balkeri ki magasheretz. It says that Balkeri is like magasheretz, like somebody who touched a dead animal, like a dead animal asheretz, one of the 8 shratzim that conveys tum'ah. So my lav le mahanotam. Doesn't that mean to say that they have the same rule insofar as exclusion from the camp is concerned? And we know that touching a sheretz is just like touching a dead body. You're only prohibited from entering the Beit HaMikdash, but you're allowed to go on the mount, the Temple Mount. You're allowed to be in Jerusalem. You're allowed to go on the Temple Mount. So you're only excluded from one camp, not from 2 camps. So it's saying a Balkeri is like touching a sheretz. So that implies you're only excluded from one camp. So, look, the tumatam. No, it doesn't mean with respect to what camps you're excluded from. It means with respect to the level of impurity. Okay? In other words, that both of them are 1-day tum'ot. If you have a seminal emission, it's a 1-day tum'ah. You touch a sheretz, it's also a 1-day tum'ah. So but there's a difference in that if you touch the sheretz, you're allowed to go on the Temple Mount. You're just not allowed in the Beit HaMikdash. If you're a Balkeri, you're not even allowed on the Temple Mount. That would be a difference. The Gemara says, but wait a second. Letumatam, if you're telling me that this Baraita is coming just to tell me about the laws of Tum'ah, or actually it's a Mishnah. This Mishnah is coming just to tell me about the severity of the Tum'ah, that they're both 1-day Tum'ot, but I Tumat Erev Ketivbe, I Tumat Erev Ketivbe. The extent of their Tum'ah is written in the Torah. Why do I need a Mishnah to tell me that? I don't need to learn that from a Mishnah. So why would the Mishnah tell me that? Rather, it must be telling me then, what is the Mishnah coming to add? It's coming to add about the exclusion from the camp. That just like the Magasheretz is only excluded from one camp, the one who is a Balkeri is also excluded from one camp. We know a Zav is excluded from 2 camps. He can't even go on the Har HaBayit. But the question is, should we put the Balkeri, since it's less severe, together with touching the sheretz, or since it's a similar type of tumah, because it emerges from the body, maybe we should put it with the zav. That's the question. So the Gemara says, no, I'm going to tell you that really, it's not telling you about exclusion from camps. Rabbi Yochanan is right. A Balkeri is excluded from 2 camps. It's more severe in that respect than touching a sheretz. So then why do we need it? Why do we need it though, since the pasuk already tells us what the extent of the tumah is? So why is this equation to the sheretz necessary? What's it teaching me? What it's telling you is a different din, a different equation between touching a sheretz and balkeri. Not how many camps they're excluded from. Because how many camps they're excluded from is different. The balkeri is excluded from 2 camps, like a zav. The sheretz is only excluded from the Beit HaMikdash. And it can't be coming to tell me that they're both one day tum'ot, because I already know that from the Torah. I don't need you to tell me that. So what is the Mishnah coming to tell you? That both of them have in common that they are mitameh be'ones, which means even if a sheretz fell on you from the rafter, okay, you didn't have anything to do with it, you didn't touch it on purpose, you didn't expect it, you're tameh. And so too, if you have a seminal emission against your will, you ate some food that stimulated your body to have a seminal emission, it doesn't matter that it's ones, that it wasn't on purpose. In other words, the on purpose would be if you had marital relations. It came to you somewhere else, it wasn't on purpose. Still, it's mitameh. Okay? And so that's the sense in which they are equated. So when the Mishnah says that Magash Sheretz and Balkari are the same, it means in that respect. As opposed to a Zav is different. A Zav, if he eats spicy food and he has a Ziva, we say that's, I don't know if that would happen, but I'm just saying, if he takes a medication that causes it, if he does a lot of exercise and it causes it, whatever might cause it externally, if it's not from an underlying condition, it's not a Zav. Whereas Balkari, we don't care why it happened. It came out. But now the Gemara says, Meitive, we're going to raise an objection again. Bo'el nida kitmemet. It says in that same Mishnah that bo'el nida is tmemet, is like a tmemet. Somebody who has relations, marital relations with a nida, and somebody is the same as a tmemet. Is the same as somebody who touches a dead body. So what is it talking about? In what sense is it the same? Right, lemai. If you're going to tell me that the tum'ah is the same because both of them are 7-day tum'ah. If you touch a dead body, 7 days tameh. If you have relations with a nida, 7 days tameh. But I tumat shiva kitiv be, I tumat shiva kitiv be. But in both cases, it already says in the Torah 7. We don't need the Mishnah to tell you that. It must be telling you with regard to exclusion from the camp. Just like a tmemet is only excluded from the Beit HaMikdash, but he can be in what's called the Machaneh Leviah, the Levitical camp, which in modern terms in Israel was the Har HaBayit. He can be there. So too, the Bo'el Nida, the person who has relations with the Nida, can be there. He doesn't have to go out of the Har HaBayit. Okay, so what does that show you? Elalav lemachanotam umidesefa lemachanotam have reshanami lemachanotam. So what does that imply, though? If in the same series of cases, the equation of the bo'el nida, the equation of the person who had relations with the nida, to the case of the person who touched a dead body, is not an equation as to the nature of their impurity. It's an equation as to how far they're excluded from places of holiness. If that's true, then so too when it compares Magasheretz to Balkari, and it says that touching a sheretz is like a Balkari, it must also be telling you with respect to what camps he's excluded from, and it's telling you that actually the Balkari can be on the Har HaBayit also. Not like Rabbi Yochanan said. So wait a second, the Gemara says, Midi Irya. What kind of logic is this? Hakidita v'hakidita. How do you know that it's not two different things? In other words, they're making analogies here. They're saying in a certain respect, touching a sheretz is similar to a balkari. In what respect? In the respect that it doesn't have to be voluntary. It doesn't have to be a conscious, purposeful touching or a conscious, purposeful emission. And when it talks about the connection between someone who has relations with a menstruant and somebody who touches a dead body, it's speaking about with respect to which camps they're excluded from. It's two different issues. You don't have to assume that they're talking about the same issue. Okay? So therefore we could still maintain what Rabbi Yochanan said, which is that a Balkari is excluded from two camps, not only from one. Now the Gemara says, Meitive will raise an objection again, Mitzorah Chamor Mizav. It says the Mitzorah, somebody who has Tzara'at, he has this type of special leprosy, divinely visited leprosy. Chamor Mizav, it's more stringent than a Zav. V'zav Chamor mitmemet. And a Zav is more stringent than Tmemet, right? Because we saw that already. A Mitzorah is excluded from all three camps. He can't even be in Jerusalem. He can't even be in the city of Jerusalem. The Zav can be in Jerusalem, but can't be on Har HaBayit. Right? The Tmemet can be on Har HaBayit, but he can't be in the Beit HaMikdash. He's only excluded from one place. So each one is more stringent. And then it says, Yatsa Balkari, to exclude the Balkari. The Balkari is somebody who has a regular seminal emission. Shetememet chamor mimeno. That a tememet, a person who is impure because he touched a dead body, is more stringent than a Balkari. So what does that mean? He's more stringent than a Balkari. So what the Gemara first takes is, my yatsa. What does it mean that we exclude the Balkari? Lav yatsa miklal zav ubal klal tamemet. Dat tamemet chamor mimeno umutar b'machane leviyah. So the Gemara says, what does it mean here? It's confusing because it says that the zav is more stringent than the tmemet. That's why the tmemet can be on the Har Habayit. The zav is not allowed to be on the Temple Mount. He can only be in the city of Jerusalem, but he can't be on the Temple Mount. And then it says to exclude the Balkari. To exclude him from which one? To exclude him from what? So the Gemara first suggests what it means is we don't include the Balkari in the category of zav. Why? Because why is zav excluded from two camps? Why does zav not allowed to be on the Har Habayit? He can only be in the city of Jerusalem. Because zav is more stringent than a person who became impure from contact with the dead. A zav is more stringent than tmemet. That's why. But yatsa Balkari, that wouldn't apply to a Balkari. Because actually, in a Balkari's case, the tmemet is more stringent than him. The tmemet on every dimension is more stringent than a Balkari. A Balkari is a very light impurity. It's a one day. It's very simple. So what does that seem to imply? That we should not impose upon the Balkari the stringency of the zav and say that he can't be on the Temple Mount. We should, and say that he can't be on the Temple Mount. We should say that the zav can't be on the Temple Mount because the zav is even more stringent than the tmemet. But the Balkari is not more stringent than the tmemet. On the contrary, tmemet is more stringent than Balkari. So we shouldn't force the Balkari to be more strict than the tmemet and to get off the Temple Mount. We should let him on the Temple Mount, just not into the Beit HaMikdash. That's the logic, so it makes sense. But then the Gemara says, lo. But that contradicts Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan had said that just like the zav cannot be in the Beit HaMikdash and cannot be on the Temple Mount, so too the Balkari. So it's a contradiction. Lo, yatsa mimachane tmemet v'nechnas machane zav v'af al gav de tmemet chamor mimenu demutar b'machane leviyah. So now the Gemara says, no, let's read it properly. What it's really saying is that the tmemet, it's saying that actually no, the Balkari is with the zav. And what had the Braita said? It said that the zav goes even further than the tmemet, right? Because the zav is more stringent than the tmemet. And then it says yatsa Balkari, with the exception of the Balkari, who is not more stringent than the tmemet. But what does it mean? It means that the Balkari is with the zav also, even though the Balkari is not more stringent than the tmemet. That's what it means. Even though it's not more stringent than the tmemet, he's still with the zav. So, in other words, he has the same rule as the zav, even though the reasoning doesn't apply. Why? Because we compare it to what it's more similar to. So even though in stringency it's not similar to zav, in the mechanics it's an emission from the genital area, it's the same. So therefore we put it together. So that's actually a proof for Rabbi Yochanan. That reading of the Braita supports Rabbi Yochanan. So in the end we conclude that even though the Balkari in stringency is much less than the zav, it's even less than the tmemet, but in terms of the nature of the tum'ah, it's similar to zav, so we put it in the same category of zav, and we say that he can be in the city of Jerusalem, but he can't be on the Temple Mount, the Balkari.
The condition of zav is not an emission. I mean, it's an emission. It's not an ejaculation.
No, it's not ejaculation. It's some other kind of fluid emission, right? But it comes from the same place, so it's similar in that respect. Right. But no, I don't know what it is exactly.
It's tied to.
It's some kind of. It sounds like an STD. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Some kind of an infection. I don't know exactly what it is. So Tana kamed Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. So a Tana taught in front of Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. V'yatza el mechutz lamachaneh. It says two things about the Balkari. There's a pasuk that talks about the Balkari. It was actually in just 2 weeks ago, the parasha of 2 weeks ago in Parashat Ki Tetzeh. Right? It says it says he should go out of the camp. He shouldn't come into the camp. Why does it say it both? So when it says he should go out of the camp, that means machane shechina. That means the camp of the divine presence, aka the Beit HaMikdash itself. And then when it says lo yavo el toch hamachane, he shouldn't come into the camp. What does that mean? That's talking about machane leviyah. Right? That means the Levitical camp, which makes sense according to what we just said, that he can't be in either of those two camps. Okay, Amar Lei. Oh, I'm sorry. Mikan lebalkeri she'yatza chutz lechutz l'shtei machanot. This is a proof that the balkeri goes out of two camps, because it says it twice. V'yatzal michutz hamachane lo yavo el toch hamachane. It says it twice. Amar Lei akati lo ayilte apikte. So he said to him, in other words, the Tana said this. The Tana is the person who's reciting a Braita. Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said to him, you haven't even kicked him out, and you're already bringing him in. Akati lo ayalte. Sorry, you haven't brought him in. Apikte, you're kicking him out. Lishana acharina, of an alternative language. Akati lo apikte ayalte. You haven't kicked him out, you're bringing him in. What does he mean? He means the pasuk doesn't make sense to interpret it the way that you're interpreting it, because it says he should leave the camp, and you're saying that refers to machane shechina. That refers to the divine camp. Where does that mean you are? The Levitical camp. And then you're saying you can't come into the Levitical camp. What do you mean? You just told me to go into it. You said leave the divine camp. Right? So what it means is,
you can't go back into it.
In other words, the pasuk hasn't even told him to come in, and you're already kicking him out. Alternatively, it hasn't told him to go out, and you're talking about him coming in, meaning it never told him he had to leave the Levitical camp. It says, lo yavo el toch hamachane, and you're already telling him he can't come in. In other words, by telling him to leave the divine presence camp, you're telling him to go into the Levitical camp. But then you're saying, don't come into the Levitical camp. But you never said I had to go out of the Levitical camp. So the pasuk is strange if it's talking about two different machanot, if it's talking about two different camps. Because it says to leave one, it says to leave A, which would put you in B. But really you're saying he needs to be in C. Right? So it's a strange setup, the pasuk. So rather, the first pasuk means machane leviyah. When the first half of the pasuk that says go out of the camp means you have to go all the way out, even of the Levitical camp. And when it says you can't come in, it means he can't come into the divine presence, the divine camp. Meaning to say, if he's in the middle, he either goes to the left or the right. Okay, so to speak.
Going out can't mean going into the divine camp.
Right, meaning if you're telling me I can't be in the Levitical camp, where do I go? So by telling you, it means go all the way out, right? So don't come closer in, go further out. Matkif la Ravina. Ravina said, I have an objection to this. Why can't you have a simpler understanding here? Forget about leaving the Levitical camp. Just say like this, that both of them are referring to the Mishkan itself, the divine camp, Machane Shechina. One is telling you don't come out, and one is telling you don't come back in. I'm sorry, one is telling you go out, the other one is telling you don't come back in. So one is a mitzvat aseh, get out, leave, it's a positive mitzvah. The other one is a negative, don't come back in. Don't call us, we'll call you.
That
right?
makes more sense.
Yeah. So he says, why can't we read it that way? So imken, if that's true, but if that were the case, why does it say the word machane twice? It would have been simpler for it to say, go out of the camp, v'lo yavo el toch, the Gemara says, which probably would more likely be written, v'lo yavo el tocha, or something like that. Don't come back into it. Right? Why does it mention machane twice? By mentioning machane twice, it means get out of two machanot, not just one. And that means you have to be out of both the divine camp and also the Levitical camp. In our terms would mean the Beit HaMikdash, you can't go in, and you can't go on the Temple Mount either. Okay, now we go back to the Korban Pesach. We said the removing of the waste from the bowels of the Korban Pesach can be done on Shabbat. Even though it's not necessary immediately, it can be done because it will putrefy. So, my michui kiravav, what does it mean, michui kiravav? Ravuna amar sheminakvin basakin. What it means is that they would make holes in the bowels, and basically they would drain it. Okay? It was a draining process that would be done. And Rashi says that the word michui means to remove something liquidy that will drip out. In other words, to drain it out. Okay, or it could be that the word michui means to cut, because you're cutting a hole in it. Okay, Rashi says two possibilities. But either way, he's saying, what do? You cut holes in it, and you drain out whatever liquid waste is going to come out of the inside of the bowels of the Korban Pesach. Now, another interpretation. Rav Chia bar Rav Amar, Shirka demaya dinafka agav dochka desakina. What he says is that Rashi explains lecha aduka b'me'ayim shiyotze mehen bedohak basakin. It means you have to remove. In other words, the first opinion is saying you just make holes and it drips out by itself. But the second opinion is saying no, you actually have to go in and forcibly remove. The part, the sort of like what's a good word? Like the slime that's inside. You have to actually remove it actively. So it's more involved. This version is more involved. You actually have to cut it and go in and remove whatever waste is adhering to the inside of the bowel. So it's not just what's going to drip out. If you cut holes in it, it will drip out. But imagine a bag of soup. Remember the tabachnik soups? Right? Imagine a bag of soup, right? If you cut a hole in it, most of it will come out, but you're still going to have it there. But if you have to go in and you have to scoop out whatever is left.
Why, for the Korban Pesach, what do we need the bowels for? What do we need the intestine for?
Well, since we're going to roast the whole thing,
it's got to be the whole.
We're going to roast the whole thing, right? So it's going to be putrid. It's going to become smelly and disgusting if we don't remove it, right?
I understand why we want to clean it, but
we're not going to eat that part. But we
still have to.
The question is, to what extent can we handle it? So we did shechita on Pesach. You have to do it on the day. You have to do it on the day. That's Shabbat.
Why don't we just remove the whole intestine? We're not going to eat it. We're roasting Korban Pesach to eat it, right?
Right, you're going to eat the meat, right.
So what do we want to have? We're going to make kishka out of it?
I guess they're going to leave it together because they have to roast it whole.
It has to be the whole.
Right, you have to do the whole thing.
Because that's why.
Yeah. So they even though they're not necessarily going to eat that part, I would assume.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so now we have my ta'ama the Chia bar Rav. Where is Rav Chia bar Rav getting this idea that what michui kiravav means is to actually squeeze out? In other words, it's a very involved process of extraction of the stuff, and it's not just a matter of making holes and letting it drip out. So he gets that from a pasuk that says, and this pasuk is found in Yeshayahu, I believe. Yeah. In Yeshayahu, it says, "Vira'u kivasim kidovram." It says that the kivasim, that the sheep will graze kidovram. We're going to see what that means later. V'chorvot mechim garim yochedlo. And the ruins of the mechim here is a word, means like the fat people, or then it's a negative term for them. In other words, the people who were once eating off the fat of the land, I guess, garim yochelu, the sojourners will eat it. In other words, what it's saying is in the time of redemption, those people who were, really living it up are going to be gone, and their ruins, the righteous people are going to come and take them. Okay? So mechim is a reference to the people who had a lot. So my mashma, still, mechim michui. So they're saying michui kravav, the removal of the waste from inside the bowels is coming from this word mechim, which is a description of the fat cats who were living off the land, that lost their stuff. So what does it mean? My mashma targem Rav Yosef. It's like Rav Yosef says, v'nechsehen derishiyaya tzadikaya yahsenun. That Rav Yosef gave the targum. He gave the translation of that pasuk as, what does it mean? The mechim, the fatted people. It means the wicked people. The wicked people who had a lot of assets. The righteous people are going to inherit them. So too. In other words, it means something negative. So in the same way, the michui means getting the waste, right? The bad people, getting the badness out. So michui doesn't mean just removal, but it actually is a reference to the badness. You have to get all the badness out of the bowels, not just drain what will, the part that's already liquid and will drip out, but you actually have to fully extract. That's what he interprets it. So now we're going back to the pasuk of Yeshayahu. We're going to do a little bit of drash for the rest of the Amud. So he says that, what does it mean, kidovram, that the sheep will graze kidovram the way that they were. The kidovram could mean the way they were spoken. Okay, so that's what he says. Rav Amar Menashia Bar Yirmiyah. Rav Menashia Bar Yirmiyah says, what does this mean? Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Kim Midubarbam. Kidovram means means here, kimidubar bam, as it was said about them. In other words, as it was said in the prophecies about them. The sheep here is a reference, of course, to the Jewish people. It's talking about the flock of Israel, So it's not talking about actual ba sheep. It's talking about people. So what it means is, like it was spoken about them. So my kimidubar bam, what was spoken about them? Amar Abaye v'chorvot mechaim garim yochelu. So Abaye says it's in the pasuk. It says that the assets of the bad people will be eaten by the righteous. That's what it means when it says that what's spoken about them will be fulfilled.
So why do we want to get rid of it?
What?
Never mind.
No, they're using the word, they're just using that as a word. Okay. In other words, before they were using that as a derivation for understanding what the word in the Mishnah means. Michoy, it means extracting the bad. And how do we know that it refers to badness? Because of the word mechin. But now we're analyzing the pasuk itself. Right, in the pasuk itself, it says that in the future, in the times of Mashiach, the sheep will graze according to what was spoken about them, and the righteous will inherit the wicked. So so Abaye says that's what it's telling you when it says that the sheep will graze according to what was spoken about them. It means that they, the good people, will eat the fruits of the labor of the wicked. But Rava doesn't like this. Amar le Rava bishlama iketiv chorvot kedeka amrat hashtad dechtiv vechorvot miltachriti kamar. What do you mean? It's two things in the pasuk. There's a vav connecting it. It says the sheep will graze as it was spoken about them, and the righteous will inherit the wicked. It's not the same thing. So still, what does it mean that the sheep will graze as it was spoken about them? Ela Amar Rava, rather Rava says, Kid Rav Hananel. This is like what Rav Hananel says, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav. Amar Rav Hananel Amar Rav, because Rav Hananel said in the name of Rav, Atidin tzadikim, sheyachayu atamitim. It means that the righteous will bring back the dead. They will revive the dead. Ketiv hacha, it says here, Vera'u kvasim kedovram, that the sheep will graze according to what was spoken about them. Mukhtiv, and it says hatam over there, Yir'u Bashan v'Gilad kime olam, that Bashan and Gilad will graze or will shepherd like in the olden days. Okay. So it's speaking about the shepherding of Bashan and Gilad like the olden days. What does it mean like the olden days? Bashan ze Elisha. The word Bashan is a reference to Elisha the prophet. Habamena Bashan, because he came from Bashan. Shenemar, as it says in Divrei Yamim, v'Yanai v'Shafat b'Bashan, that Yanai and Shafat were from Bashan. Uchtiv po Elisha ben Shafat. Elisha was the son of Shafat. Asher takmayim al yidei Eliyahu. So Elisha was from Bashan. Bashan is in the pasuk that Bashan will rule, will shepherd like in the days of old. So that's a reference to Elisha. And Eliyahu, and Gilad ze Eliyahu, and the word Gilad is a reference to Eliyahu. Shneimar vayamar Eliyahu tishbi mitoshvei Gilad. So Eliyahu is he's Eliyahu Giladi. So what does that mean? So it says that Bashan and Gilad will shepherd like in the days of old. And here it's saying that the sheep will graze according to what was spoken about them. What does that mean? Under the leadership of Eliyahu and Elisha. And what did Eliyahu and Elisha do? They were capable of resuscitating the dead, because both Eliyahu and Elisha resuscitated the dead. So what does that mean? That the leaders in the tzaddikim in the times of the Mashiach are going to have the same miraculous ability to resuscitate the dead, to revive the dead, that Elisha and Eliyahu had. Which, as the Rambam explains in Moreh Nevuchim, the ability of a prophet to effectuate miracles, and the Ralbag explains this as well, is in direct proportion to the level of prophecy. So what it means is they're going to be on such a level of prophecy that they're able to perform such miracles in the times of Mashiach. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, Atidim tzadikim sheyachayu metim. It says that in the future, that tzadikim will revive the dead. Shene'amar, as it says, Od yeshvu zakenim uzkenot b'rechovot Yerushalayim v'ish mish'anto biyado merov yamim. Because it says that in the future, the elderly men and women will sit in the streets of Jerusalem. It's a famous pasuk. V'ish mish'anto biyado merov yamim, and the people will live to will have great longevity, to the point that people will be walking with walking sticks because they're so old. Uchtiv, and it says further. It says v'samtam mishanti al pnei anar. It says about when Elisha comes home. Remember the story where the boy dies and he needs to revive him. So he says to Gehazi, "Take my staff and put it onto the face of the boy, and it will resuscitate him." Right? He gives his staff. And in the end, he is able to resuscitate the boy. And so what do you see from that? It talks about the people having mishanto biyado, having a staff in their hand. And where else do we see about a staff? Elisha. And what was Elisha's staff capable of doing? Resuscitating the dead. So what does it mean? In the future, the tzaddikim, the elders who are the tzaddikim, will have the staff in their hand, meaning that they'll be able, because the Mefarshim explain, how is that a blessing that people are going to be walking around with a walking stick? That's not really a blessing. It would be a better blessing if they could walk around without a walking stick. So what does it mean that they're going to have a walking stick? For tchiyat hamitim. They're going to have this power. So Ula Rami. Ula raised an objection. He showed a contradiction between two pesukim. Ketiv bila hamavet lanetzach. First it says bila hamavet lanetzach, that in the future there will be no death. God will swallow up death forever. We always say that in a shiva, bila hamavet lanetzach. Uchtiv ki anar ben me'ai shana yamut. But then it says regarding the Yemot HaMashiach, a young man at the age of 100 will die. Meaning to say that when somebody dies at the age of 100, we're going to say, wow, what a young guy to go at 100. We're getting close to that now, because still, people will say, oh, he was only in his 70s, he was only in his 80s. It doesn't sound so old anymore, right? People will say that. In the, let's say, 30 years ago, that was much older. That was perceived as much older. So we're getting close to that. So it says, now we'll say, oh, a 100-year-old guy is a na'ar, he's a young man, and he died 100 years old. But it still means that there's going to be death, right? Because it said that there's not going to be death at all. And now it says, no, there will be death, it'll just be great longevity. So what's the reconciliation of this? He said that one is talking about lokasha, kan bisol, kan ba'akum. That one is talking about the Jewish people, one is talking about the nations of the world. The Jewish people will have this special blessing that they will not die, there will be no more death. But the nations of the world will have great longevity, great blessing, but not live forever. But then the Gemara asks, why are we talking here about Ovdei Kochavim? You're talking about the nations of the world. It says Ovdei Kochavim, idolaters. They're going to have such a long life. They're going to have such a prolonged existence. Why should they get the special blessing? What did they do to deserve it? Okay, so the Gemara says, no, it's not true, because it says, because it says other nations are going to come and take care of your sheep, and members of other nations are going to be your farmers and manage your vineyards. In other words, you're going to get to sit and study Torah all the time. You're not going to have to worry about the material things. The nations of the world are going to take care of you. Kind of like what the Haredim expect the Medinat Yisrael to do for them today, is what the nations of the world will do, because they're going to value the Torah. They're going to say they have something so good, we want to support it. If that were the case in Israel, that they were inspiring the people so much that they wanted to support it, then that would be wonderful. But that's not the case. But that's what will be in the future. So that's why they also need longevity. They also they will share in the blessing of a long life, because they're going to be supporting the Torah. Rav Chisda showed a contradiction between two psukim. Ktiv, v'chafra halevana ubosha chama. It says that the moon will be embarrassed, will be shamed, and the sun will be embarrassed, which is taken here to mean that they won't shine in the future time. Okay, they're not going to be shining, sun and moon. But it also says, but it says in another pasuk that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. And the light of the sun will be like 49, will be like double 7, meaning 7 times 7, like 49 times the light of Shivat HaYamim, the light of creation. So in other words, the sun is going to be enormously bright, and the moon is going to be as bright as the sun is now.
These are the end of days?
This is at the end of days.
Yeah,
right. So on one hand it says they're not going to shine anymore, and on the other hand it says that they're going to be so much brighter. Okay, Rashi says that the total of that would be, if it's 49 times the light of creation, then the light of creation was itself even more than the light of today. It turns out to be 343 times as bright as the sun of today. Okay? So, lo kashe, no problem. Kan le olam haba, kan le Yemot HaMashiach. One is talking about olam haba, one is talking about Yemot HaMashiach. In other words, there are two stages. That there's the purely spiritual olam haba, and there's Yemot HaMashiach. Yemot HaMashiach is a time of redemption. In the time of redemption, there will just be a super powerful light. But in the times of pure spirituality, you won't need the physical lights anymore at all. All the light will be spiritual. You won't need the sun and the moon anymore. What about Shmuel? Shmuel says there won't be anything supernatural during Yemot HaMashiach. Nothing supernatural, just a redemption, return to Israel, rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. But nature is going to go according to its own laws. And the Jewish people will be independent. There won't be any war, but that's not supernatural. So what is he going to do with the pasuk that says that the sun is going to be burnt, is going to be so much brighter, and the moon is going to be so much brighter? That sounds like a change of nature. So how does he going to deal with that? Since he can't say it's talking about Yemot HaMashiach, because he holds that in Yemot HaMashiach, in this world, it's never going to change. Nature is nature. So he'll say, he'll say they're both talking about Olam Haba. V'lo kasher, no problem. Kan b'machane shechina, kan b'machane tzadikim. One is talking about machane shechina, a higher level of spirituality. One is talking about machane tzadikim. In other words, in the next world, there will be the level of the righteous. The level of the righteous, they'll still need some light. They'll still need some help. But the Machane Shekhinah, those who are allowed into the framework, the domain of Hashem, in other words, they're really close to the divine presence, they're not going to need any light at all. So for the ones who are somewhat distant, it will seem like the brightness, an unimaginable brightness. But for those who are in the Machane Shekhinah, they will have an experience that they won't need the brightness of the luminaries at all. Now what this really means, we don't know.
Are we talking about spiritual light anyway? Because the light of creation wasn't physical light. It was
some kind of spiritual light. Right. So that's being used. If it's talking about the physical world, then it's using it as a metaphor, obviously, of some sort. Yeah. So all of this is somewhat metaphoric because we don't really understand what does it mean to be in the in the mechitza or in the camp of God in Olam Haba versus the camp of the tzaddikim. I mean, we don't really understand this fully what this means, and what does it mean to have the sun and the moon there and all that. But
it's like Asmas Hashem as opposed to
something closer to the ultimate. Than something more removed. So Rava showed a contradiction. Ani amit v'chayeh. It says, I will kill and I will bring back to life. Uchtiv machatzti v'ani erpa. And then Hashem says, machatzti v'ani erpa. I cause harm and I heal. I wound and I heal. So he says, hashta achuye mechayeh. If we already know God can give life to those who died, isn't it clear that He can heal those who are sick? Why does it first mention, I will kill and bring back to life, and then mention, I will wound you and heal you? Obviously, He can wound you and heal you. What it means, El Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it means is, Ma she'ani memit ani mechayeh. What it means is, not that I can kill some people and I can bring others to life. What it means is, the very same people that I kill, I can bring them to life. In other words, for somebody who dies, I can bring them back to life. And what it means is that when Hashem does Tchiyat HaMetim, He brings the person back exactly as they were when they died, meaning with whatever wounds they have, and then Va'ani Erpa, then I heal them. So it's two stages. It means the same person that was alive. It's not just saying Hashem can give life and also give death, and Hashem can harm you and heal you. What it means is the same person that he killed, so to speak, that died, Hashem can bring back, and then He brings him back as he was, and then Hashem heals him. So it's two stages. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Ani amid v'chayeh, yachol mita be'achad v'chayim be'achad. It says, I kill and I give life. You might think this is talking about two different people. Hashem destroys the wicked and gives life to the other one. No, keder she'olam noheg, and that would just be nature. But Talmud Omar, what is it telling you? Machatzti v'ani yerpa. I wound and I heal. Ma makau rufua be'achad, af mita v'chayim be'achad. Just like when it says, I wound and I heal, it means with the same person. I can wound you and heal you. With death and life, it means the same person. Mikan tshuva, omrim en tchiyat hamitim min haTorah. This is a response to those who say there's no mention of tchiyat hamitim, of resuscitation of the dead in the Torah, because it is alluded to in this pasuk. Davar acher, another interpretation. But tchila mashani memit ani mechayeh, v'adar mashem ani v'ani erpa. Another interpretation is like what Rava said before, that just like the person died is how I bring them back, and then I bring them back with, let's say, various defects, and then I heal them. Like the lame person will be able to walk, the blind person will be able to see, and so on. But first he's resuscitated in his damaged state, and then Hashem will heal him. We turn to Amud Bet, Vekter Chalavav. We get back to some of the halacha here. It says that we can burn the fats of the Korban Pesach on Shabbat. So in other words, this is a case where The Korban Pesach is offered on Shabbat, but the Seder is not actually until Motzei Shabbat. So we don't roast the Korban Pesach until after Shabbat because we don't need to. But we burn the fats on the altar. Tanya Amar Rabbi Shimon said in a Braita, Bo'u re'eh kama chaviva mitzvah b'sha'ata. You see from here how good it is to do a mitzvah in its proper time. Shaharei hekter halavim ve'evarim uftarim kishirim kol halayla. Because really we could burn the fats and the limbs and all the different parts of the Korban Pesach all night long. We don't have to do it right away. We have to do the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. We have to put its blood on the altar, but we don't have to do the rest of it. And yet we do it. We don't wait until nighttime. Even though we could, we don't. We want to do the mitzvah right away. So since we're already doing the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, we do the complete mitzvah. We burn even things we could have reserved for the nighttime. Now it says, Harkavato v'havato, that carrying, that we said that slaughtering the Korban Pesach and applying the blood overrides Shabbat. However, carrying it to the Beit HaMikdash, or bringing it from outside the Techum, or cutting off a wart on the Korban Pesach to be able to offer it, these things we can't do. According to, well, it's a machloket, we're going to see between Rabbi Eliezer and the other Chachamim, as we saw in the Mishnah. But let's for now say, we can't do it. Okay, we're going with the majority, we can't do it. So the Gemara asks, Uriminu chotchin yabelet b'mikdash. But we learned that you can cut off a wart in the Mikdash. You bring the Korban and you cut it off. That's in Eruvin. Avalo b'medina. That was at the end of Masechet Eruvin. You can cut off a wart in the Mikdash, just not in the comfort of your own home. In other words, it's an Isur D'Rabanan. And if you cut it with a kli, with a vessel, then you can't do it anywhere, not even in the Beit HaMikdash. If you want to do it by hand to remove the wart, so that it won't have a blemish, so you can offer it, you can do it by hand in the Mikdash, just not in your home. So what's the problem? Bring your Korban Pesach to the Beit HaMikdash, take the wart off in the Beit HaMikdash with your hand. Why do you tell me that I can't do it? So the answer is Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina had two different resolutions of this, and this exact sugya is brought in the end of Masechet Eruvin. We didn't learn this part, but I learned it when I was gone. At the end of the Masechet, says Idi ve'idi biyad. Both of them are talking about cases where you remove the wart with your hand. Ha bilaha ha bivisha. But it depends. One is talking about a lecha. It's talking about where it is wet. It's a moist wart. The other one is a dried one. In other words, in Masechet Eruvin, where it told us that you're allowed to remove a wart, that's talking about one that's dried out. It crumbles right off. In our Masechet, where it says you can't remove it, it means a liquidy one. In other words, it's really it's really harder to remove that. I mean, you would have to do it with your hand anyway, but it's something which really is more organically connected to the body of the animal, so you wouldn't be allowed to do it. So according to that, you have two conditions. You have that it has to be dry and that you can't use a knife. Right? That would be the two conditions. However, V'chad Amar, another interpretation is Idi v'idi v'lecha. They're both talking about moist wart, velo kasha ha biyad ha bekli. But there's a difference, because in Eruvin, where it says that you're allowed to remove the wart, that's talking about with your hand. And in our Masechet, where it says you're not allowed to, it's talking about with a vessel, with a kli, with a knife. Okay, so according to that, then, in order to justify removing a wart, you only need one of two things. Either you do it by hand, or it's dry. Okay? According to the first one, you need both. You can remove only a dry one and only with your hands. But the second interpretation has it that either one of those two conditions, either it has to be dried out, or it could be moist, but you're removing it with your hand. So now the Gemara says, so what was the reason why each one here chose his respective interpretation? They both work, right? They both fit. So the one who says that the distinction between the two Mishnayot is that the one in Eruvin that says you can remove the wart is talking about when you do it by hand. And the one that's that is saying that you can't do it, which is our Mishnah, is talking about when you do it with a knife. Why doesn't he use the other distinction and say that the one that allows it is talking about dry, and the one that doesn't allow it is talking about moist? So he doesn't, because Amar lach yevesha mifrach bricha. He says the reason why is because I don't think a dried out wart is anything at all. That's not even valid. we wouldn't even discuss that. You can definitely remove a dried out wart, it's nothing. So we're only talking about a moist wart, and the only question is, with a knife or with your hand? With a knife is not allowed, with your hand is allowed. But according to the one who says that the resolution of the two Mishnayot goes this way, both are talking about with your hand. The only question is it moist or dry? If it's moist, you can't. If it's dry, you can. So then, why didn't he make the distinction between a hand and a vessel? Why did he make this distinction between the type of wart? Answer, Amar lach, kli hakataniyatam, im bekli kan v'kan asur. The reason why I didn't want to do that was because if you look at the Mishnah Masechet Eruvin, it explicitly says, if you're using your hand, it's allowed. If you're using a vessel, it's not allowed. So why would our Mishnah come back and revisit the case to tell you that when you're using a vessel, it's not allowed? Instead, it must be saying, even when you're using your hand, if it's liquidy, if it's moist, you can't do it. Because otherwise, it's superfluous. We already know when you're using a knife. If the only case where you can't do it is where you're using a knife, we already know that from the Mishnah in Eruvin. So it must be that there's another case where you can't do it, even with your hands, which is when it's moist. And that must be what our Mishnah is talking about. Must be. But the Gemara says, no, that's not true. So what will the other guy say? What about the guy who said that the only distinction between the two Mishnayot is that one is talking about by hand and one is talking about with a vessel? Ours is talking about with a vessel. Okay, so meaning whether it's dry or moist, it's talking about with a vessel. So he says, no. The answer is, he'll tell you, you're right. To tell you that when with a kli is prohibited, and without a kli, with just your hand, is allowed, that I wouldn't really need our Mishnah for. That's clear in the Mishnah in Eruvin. And that forced one view to say, oh, there must be a new chidush here. What's the new chidush? Oh, that even by hand you can't remove a moist wart. But he'll say, no, that's not true. Actually, by hand you could. The only time it's prohibited is when you use a knife. Why then do we need it in our Mishnah? To teach you the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. The machloket being that Rabbi Eliezer says the ends justify the means. If you need to use a knife to remove a wart on the animal in order to bring the Korban Pesach, it's okay. Right? So therefore, it had to come in our Mishnah, not to teach you that removing a wart with a knife is not allowed, we know that already, but to teach you that Rabbi Eliezer allows it in this special case of Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbat, and that Rabbi Yoshua doesn't. So that's how they work out the two Mishnayot. Either the Chidush in our Mishnah is that even to remove a moist wart by hand is not allowed, or the Chidush has nothing to do with that. We already know that only with a knife is disallowed. Okay, but the only, in the Mikdash at least. But the Chidush here is that Rabbi Eliezer permits it. And why does he permit it? Because he permits anything which is necessary for the mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach. So now we move back to their machloket actually itself. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Uma im shachita. Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm allowed to slaughter the Korban Pesach on Shabbat, how come I can't do any of these other things? Why can't I carry it? Why can't I walk it from outside the Techum? Why can't I cut off its wart? Shechita, you can't get any more of a violation of Shabbat than that. And Rabbi Yoshua said, no. Rabbi Yoshua said, what do you mean? On Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. You're allowed to slaughter animals for food. But you're not allowed to bring something from outside the Techum. So how can you compare? So Rabbi Yoshua l'ta'ameh. Rabbi Yoshua actually is following his own reasoning here. Da'amar simchat yom tov nami mitzvahi. Because Rabbi Yoshua says that simchat yom tov is a mitzvah. In other words, that eating good food on Yom Tov is a mitzvah. And so therefore he's saying it's analogous, because just like on Korban Pesach, you're allowed to slaughter the Korban Pesach because it's a mitzvah, but you're not allowed to do any of those other things, bringing it from outside the Tzuchum or anything like that. So too, you're allowed to slaughter an animal on Yom Tov to eat it, but that doesn't mean you can bring it from outside the Tchum. Rabbi Eliezer, however, we're going to see, will not take this analogy. He's going to say, no, there's a difference between whether you're dealing with a mitzvah or not. Let's see. So, Tanya, as we learned in a Braita, and this is brought in Masechet Beitzah at length, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein lo la'adam b'yom tov, ela ochel v'shoteh, o yoshev v'shoneh. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, chalekeu, chetzio la'achila u'shtiyah, v'chetzio le'beit HaMidrash. That according to Rabbi Eliezer, you can choose on Yom Tov if you want to eat or not. You have a choice. Either it has to be kulo lachem, meaning you enjoy the day, you eat and you drink, you enjoy yourself, or it has to be, you could just yoshev v'shoneh. Your enjoyment of Yom Tov might just be learning Torah all day long. Learn Torah all day long, you'll enjoy the day. It's fun. Okay? Rabbi Yoshua says, no. Chalkeu, you have to split it in half. Chetzio lachila ushtiya. Half of it for eating and drinking, half of it, and that's the halacha. The halacha is that we say, chetzio lashem, chetzio lachem, it should be half and half. So what does that show you though? Rabbi Eliezer will say to you, so Rabbi Yoshua says it's the same thing. Just like on Yom Tov, the Torah allows you to slaughter animals and cook, but it doesn't allow you to bring things from outside the Tchum. And it's a mitzvah. So too, the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, you're allowed to slaughter it and bring the offering, but you're not allowed to do anything else. Rabbi Eliezer will say, no, on Yom Tov, it's optional. You don't have to slaughter in order to, you don't have to eat. You could fast and learn Torah all day on Yom Tov. So it's optional. How can you compare that to Korban Pesach? Korban Pesach is not optional. It's a mitzvah. And since it's a mitzvah, therefore you can do anything, even bring it from outside the Tchum, even cut off the wart. And in fact, that's what he said in the Mishnah that we learned on Sunday, because he says in the Mishnah, it's Rishut. He says, how can you compare Rishut to mitzvah? Meaning that slaughtering on Yom Tov is only Rishut, because eating on Yom Tov is only Rishut. It's only optional, it's voluntary. Rabbi Yochanan says, they both interpret, they both derive their halachic interpretations of Simchat Yom Tov from the same psukim. In one pasuk it says it should be a day of rest for Hashem your God. One pasuk says it should be it should be a day of rest for you. So what do they say? So Rabbi Eliezer savar o kulo lashem u kulo lachem. Rabbi Yoshua savar chalakei chaytzo lashem v'chaytzo lachem. Rabbi Eliezer says either it's completely for you or completely for Hashem. Rabbi Yoshua says no, it means split it in half. They're both true. Right? It has to be half Lashem, half Lachem. Half for you, half for Hashem. So what do you see? Rabbi Eliezer says eating and drinking on Yom Tov is only a reshut, it's only voluntary. Rabbi Yoshua says it's a mitzvah. And therefore he makes an analogy between it and Korban Pesach. Very interesting. Now there's a famous question that's asked, I believe, by the Maharsha in Masachet Betzah, but it's been more than well over a decade since I last saw it, probably 15 years. But he asks, according to Rabbi Eliezer, how can you, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you choose Kulo Lachem, let's say, it's going to be totally free. How can you pray? How can you read the Torah? It has to be Kulo Lachem. And if you choose Kulo Lachem, does that mean you can't eat at all? So it's, there's an interesting question that are raised by that position. It seems to mean that you have to be kovea, one as the essential one. You have to establish my essential thing is Kulo Lachem. It doesn't mean I can't eat. If I say Kulo Lachem, it doesn't mean I can't pray. It just means that my essential activity is going to be Lachem. That's how I enjoy Simchat Yom Tov. So we'll go a little further. It says Abam Siman. There's a mnemonic here to help us remember the upcoming piece. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Hakol modim ba'atzeret. That's the ayin of Abam. Everyone agrees on Shavuot deba'ina nami lachem, that you need lachem. You can't just have kulo lashem on Shavuot, you can't. Which is ironic, right? You would think Shavuot's the day of the giving of the Torah. You should learn Torah all day. It would make sense. But no, everyone agrees you have to eat that day. My tama, Yom Shnitna Bo Torah, because Yom Shnitna Bo Torah, it's a day that the Torah was given. And since it's the day that the Torah was given, we have to celebrate it in an even more complete manner. We can't only have a spiritual simcha. Rashi says, She yismach bo b'machalu mishte leharot. You have to eat and drink laharot to show shenoach kubal yom ze liyisrael shnitna Torah. In other words, if you were to fast on the day, it doesn't look like a day that you're happy and thrilled that you received the Torah. So we have to show shenoach, that it's pleasant and acceptable that we received the Torah, and we do that. So in other words, he's saying that you're eating and drinking on Shavuot, it's not for personal satisfaction, but it's to demonstrate something. You're showing that you're happy in a physical way. Right. So you have to have a meal on Shavuot. And Amar Rabba says, Hakol modim b'Shabbat deba'ina nami lachem. Everybody agrees on Shabbat you need to have food. You can't fast on Shabbat. Ma'tam avakarat l'Shabbat oneg, because it says you should call Shabbat oneg. You should call Shabbat a pleasure. Pleasure meaning that you eat and drink on the day. And Amar Rav Yosef says, Hakol modim b'Purim deba'ina nami lachem. Rav Yosef says that you need to eat and drink on Purim. Why? Ma'tam yemei mishteh v'simcha ketiv beh. Because it says there, yemei mishteh v'simcha, days of drinking and joy. So you need to be eating and drinking on those days, there's no question. So there are 3 holidays on which a person must eat and drink, even if they normally would express their Simchat Yom Tov in a less physical way. Okay, like even if they were held like Rabbi Eliezer and they would normally learn Torah all day on Yom Tov, on Shavuot, Purim, and Shabbat, they don't have that option. They have to eat and drink on those days according to everybody. Now we had the siman at the beginning. It was Ayin Bet Mem. It doesn't actually fit the topics brought here because one is Shabbat, one is one is Purim. Where does the Mem come in? So on the side, the Haggaot says it should really be Abbas. Ayin Bet Samech, which would stand for Rabbi Eliezer, because it has an Ayin, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbah is the Bet, and the Samech is Rabbi Yosef, the Samech, to remember who the 3 teachers were. Okay, we'll go a little bit further. So, more bread Ravina. Kula shata havayativ betanita. All year round he would fast. He fasted every day. Levar me'atzarta upuria umalei yom kipureh. He would not fast on Shavuot. He would not fast on Purim, and he wouldn't fast on Erev Yom Kippur. Atzeret Yom Shnitna B'Torah. We know why he wouldn't fast on Shavuot, because we already said you have to eat on Shavuot. You have to show that you're happy. Purim, obviously you can't fulfill the mandate of making it a day of Mishtev Simcha, drinking parties and joy, if you don't eat and drink. And Malei Yom Kippurei, why did he eat on Erev Yom Kippur? Detane Chiyah Rav Midifti, because Chiyah Rav from Difti said, it says you should afflict your soul on the 9th of the month. Are we actually fasting on the 9th of the month? Yom Kippur is the 10th of the month of Tishrei, not the 9th. Why does it mention the 9th? So what it means is, it means that anybody who eats and drinks on the 9th of Tishrei, it's like he fasted 2 days. Now there's different interpretations of this. One is that since you're eating and drinking on the 9th is facilitating your fasting on the 10th, they're both coming together to combine to create the fast. So therefore it's credited to you as 2 days of involvement in the fast, because you prepared for the fast and then you did the fast. Another one is that really Yom Kippur is a day of Simcha. So really we should have food on Yom Kippur, because we're reconciling with God. It should be a happy day. So what do? We eat a meal on Erev Yom Kippur. We eat to show our Simcha entering Yom Kippur, even though we cannot eat on Yom Kippur itself. So it combines again with the fast of Yom Kippur to complete the day. A third interpretation, very interesting, is that when you eat a lot and then try to fast, you're hungrier, because your stomach expands. So actually by eating a lot on Erev Yom Kippur, you intensify the experience of Yom Kippur, you make it more painful. So therefore it's as if you fasted for 2 days. That anyway, whatever the case may be, he didn't fast that day. Rav Yosef, biyom ha'atzarta, amar avdili eglat tilta. Rav Yosef would say on Shavuot, make me a 3rd born calf. Apparently the 3rd calf born to its mother is the tastiest one. That's what Rashi says. Rashi in Sanhedrin brings another interpretation that it could mean, and also in Eruvin, I believe, he brings also that, it's in Nidarim. No, it's in Eruvin, I was right. Eruvin and Sanhedrin. He says that it could also mean that it's such a large calf that when it was born, it looked like it was 3 years old. That's why it's called the 3rd calf. Whatever the case may be. He would have a very fine delicacy for Shavuot. Why? And he said a famous line, Amar, ilo hayoma, if it were not for the day of Shavuot, where the Torah was given, he says, the kagarim, which was the cause. Kama Yosef ika b'shuka. Think how many Yosefs there are out there, but there's not any Rav Yosefs. Why am I Rav Yosef? Because the Torah was given and I learned the Torah. If not, Rashi says, shelamadti Torah, if not for the fact that I learned Torah, v'nit romamti, and I uplifted myself. There are lots of other people named Yosef in the shuk. What am I? Nobody. The Torah is what lifted me up, so I should celebrate. Rav Sheshet called Latin Yomin Mahader Le Talmudeh. Rav Sheshet every 30 days would review his entire learning. He reviewed the Shas every 30 days. And he said, he would hang himself on the door and say, Va'amar Chadai Nafshai, Chadai Nafshai. Rejoice, my soul. Rejoice, my soul. Okay, why would he say that? Kar'i lach. Lach kar'i, lach tana'i. He would say, I'm learning for you. I'm reading for you. I'm studying for you. In other words, he would say, be happy, my soul. I'm enriching you. I'm uplifting you. Eini, is that really true? Va'amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, Ilmale Torah lo nitkaymu shamayim va'aretz shenemarim lo briti yomam v'layla chukot shamayim va'aretz lo samti. That the Torah is not just something for you. Why is he saying to his soul, be happy, soul, I'm learning for you, I'm helping you? He should be saying to the universe, I'm helping you. Because what does it say? Im lo briti yomam v'layla, if not for my covenant day and night, the covenant of learning Torah, chukot shamayim va'aretz lo samti, there wouldn't be a world. The world would fall apart. So the answer is no. Everybody, human nature is that when you start to do something, you do it for yourself. Eventually, you might come to do it for something higher, but you start out doing it for yourself. And so too, Rav Sheshet was talking about the more basic motivation of enriching his own life and his own soul. And then further beyond that, of course, he agrees that it holds up the world. But that's a level of motivation beyond what he was addressing.